Hi, I'm Miss Heather from the Fox River Valley Public Library District, and I wanted to tell you about a couple picture books and chapter books that you might want to read in March to celebrate Women's History Month. So the first book I want to tell you about is Sofia Valdez, Future Prez by Andrea Beaty, illustrated by David Roberts. And this story is about a second grader who's a real go-getter. She's always helping out around her neighborhood, until one day her grandfather gets hurt on a pile of trash intended for the landfill. She gets upset and decides to do something about it and takes it all the way to the mayor and the city government. And even though she is afraid to talk to everybody, she does it because she feels strongly about it and feels that it's important to do something. And she has a great plan, and they listen to her, and she gets a park made instead. And everything goes so well, and she decides that maybe she has a future in politics, even becoming the president maybe someday. This picture book is recommended for ages 4 to 8 and is part of the Questionnaires series, which has Rosie Revere, engineer, and Ada Twist, scientist, as other books in that series that you might have heard of. The next book I want to talk about is Ambitious Girl by Meena Harris, illustrated by Marissa Valdez. Meena Harris, as you probably know, is the vice president's niece, and she wrote this from the perspective of being the niece to someone as ambitious and successful as our vice president, Kamala Harris. And it's really a story about a girl who sees that sometimes people think of ambitious, strong girls and women as pushy and loud, and that shouldn't be a bad thing. So this really is in praise of the idea of ambitious girls, and it talks about not letting anyone tell you who you are or who you should be, just being true to yourself, and that words like persistent, assertive, confident, proud, and ambitious are good words for boys and girls, men and women. This picture book is recommended for ages 4 to 8. Echo Mountain by Lauren Wolk is historical fiction. It's a chapter book recommended for ages 10 to 14. And it's about a 12-year-old girl named Ellie whose family was living in town. Her mother was a teacher and her father was a tailor when the Great Depression happened in 1929. And her family lost everything and had to move to the mountains and start from scratch and build a cabin, hunt for food, do everything themselves. When Ellie's father is injured, she has to take on even more of a role helping her family, and she learns to work with nature, and she realizes how brave and resourceful she can be. My last book, Prairie Lotus by Linda Sue Park, is also historical fiction, also recommended for 10 to 14 or around there. But in this case, Hannah is a 14-year-old girl, half white, half Chinese, and she's living the pioneer life in the 1880s in Dakota Territory. It's going to remind you of the Laura Ingalls Wilder Little House on the Prairie books, if you've ever read those. But this book goes beyond that, and it discusses the Native Americans that were also living in the territory at the time, and also what a Chinese person faced living in those times in America.
Hello everyone, my name is Miss Rachel, and I am from the Youth Services Department of the Dundee Library. And I want to do a small book talk, or rather a book tasting, about some books we have selected to highlight for Women's History Month, which is coming up very soon because Women's History Month is the entire month of March. So, I will be highlighting a couple of books from our nonfiction section and our graphic novel section of the Youth Services Department. So first up, I'm going to be talking about our nonfiction section. So the first book I want to highlight is called This Is Your Time, which is written by Ruby Bridges. And this book is recommended for ages 10 and up by the publisher, but I believe it should be a book for all ages and a book for the whole family to discuss injustices throughout the world and to start those conversations. So this is a beautiful book in many ways, but first off, it highlights the story of Ruby Bridges, who, if you didn't know, is the first black girl to go to an all-white school, and she had to be escorted to and from school by U.S. federal marshals. Second up, it is also a call to action for the reader to stand up for what they believe in, which is a really great message, I believe. So this powerful book is filled with actual photographs of Ruby's time going to school, as well as many protests that have started up in the past few years, as well as influential people for Ruby. So this was a great book that doesn't really fit either a biography or just a nonfiction. It's both. So I believe it was a really great book, and we should definitely highlight it for Women's History Month. So the second up, we're probably all familiar or heard of Amelia Earhart. She was the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean, but sadly disappeared and assumed to have died before she could make it back home. Very tragic. So our next book we're going to highlight is about another female pilot, and it is called Fly Girl Fly. Shaesta Waiz Soars Around the World by Nancy Rowe Pym, and illustrated by Alexandra Bai. So this is a picture book biography, which is recommended for children's ages 4 to 8, but again, I believe older children could be inspired by this book as well. It tells the story of a refugee, Shaesta Waiz, from Afghanistan, who follows her dream of becoming a pilot and flew across the entire world in a single-engine plane in 2017. This is a great example for Women's History Month because Shaesta Waiz made history in becoming the youngest female pilot to fly solo around the world. So I think that is fantastic, and you should definitely pick this up to learn more about this inspiring woman. So now we are going to discuss our graphic novel selections for Women's History Month. So I have 2 graphic novels I want to talk to you about. The first up is a more historical graphic novel, which is called Catherine's War, which is written by Julia Billet and illustrated by Claire Fauvel. So Catherine's War is a graphic novel inspired by a true story of a young Jewish girl named Rachel living in France during World War II. And it illustrates how Rachel had to actually change her name to Catherine in order to hide from the Germans invading France, and how she was hidden and transported to different places around France by resistance fighters, and her coming-of-age story during this chaotic time in history. So this was a wonderful graphic novel. It is recommended for ages 8 to 12 by the publisher, but I couldn't put it down. So I thought it was fantastic, and I highly recommend it for anyone, especially if they're interested in history or historical fiction or even coming-of-age stories. So check it out because it was pretty great. And our second book that I want to highlight is called Act, which is written by Kayla Mille. And Act is actually the third book from the Click series written by Kayla Mille. And it is about our main character named Olive Branch. But you don't have to read the other 2 to understand this one. I didn't get a chance to read the other 2, and I found this book perfectly enjoyable. So this book starts off with Olive and her classmates going on a field trip, but she finds out that one of her classmates didn't get to go on her field trip due to money issues. And this bothers Olive so much, she decides to do something, and she decides to act, which is where the title comes from. This book is recommended for ages 8 to 12 by the publisher, but again, it was pretty enjoyable. I couldn't put it down, so I highly recommend it. So that's what I have to recommend for Women's History Month. But stay tuned and listen to my other 2 coworkers talk about their choices for Women's History Month. All right. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Hi, my name's Danielle Piscini, and I'm the teen librarian at the Fox River Valley Public Library District, and I'm going to share some book recommendations for Women's History Month for teen books and graphic novels. The first one is a nonfiction title called A Pirate's Life for She, Swashbuckling Women Through the Ages by Laura Sook Duncombe. In this book, the author covers 16 women in history who, in search of freedom, became pirates, and whose stories you probably aren't familiar with. And it's an interesting read to uncover some stories of women that were kind of hidden in history. So the book covers why they became pirates. It's divided up into 5 sections based on their reasons for becoming pirates. And that's those reasons include revenge, escape, glory, adventure, and power. The women featured lived starting in 500 BCE up through today and came from the areas and continents of Asia, Africa, Europe, North America, and the Caribbean. This book is recommended for grade 7th and up. The next book is The Fire Never Goes Out, a Memoir in Pictures by Noelle Stevenson. This is a graphic memoir, and Noelle Stevenson is the author and illustrator behind graphic novels such as Namina and Lumberjanes, and she is also the showrunner on the updated She-Ra TV show. So this is a memoir that focuses on 8 years of Noelle's life. It's compiled from her webcomics that kind of gathered everything that happened to her in a year, and she did a summary. And it also has new material such as essays and photos and more drawings about her life. So it covers, as she's an art student, her art and comics, how her career started to take off and develop, and various mental health struggles she was going through. And it never actually puts a name on what she's going through, but through the drawings and the text, I think readers can relate no matter what they may be going through in their lives. And I think it's a relatable story and something that's very interesting to see the behind the scenes of a writer, comic, and a creative person and what they may struggle with and deal with in their lives as they're doing their work. This is a book recommended for 9th grade and up. The next graphic novel is Glass Town, The Imaginary World of the Brontes by Isabel Greenberg. This graphic novel is a mix of historical fiction and fantasy. The author combines biographical elements and details about the Bronte family, which includes authors Emily, Charlotte, Anne, and their brother Branwell, along with the fictional worlds of Angria and Gondel that they created as children, which is in the book referred to as Glass Town. So it's an interesting look at the Brontes and their lives and how this fictional world entered into the reality, and it's told in a very creative way in having Charlotte kind of look back on her life and the fictional worlds they were creating compared with the reality. It definitely was one of my favorite books of the last year, and I highly recommend it. It's recommended for grades 8 and up. The next book is Beauty Mark, a verse novel of Marilyn Monroe by Carole Boston Weatherford. This is a novel in verse, so it's written like poetry. It's told from the point of view of movie star Marilyn Monroe. In this book, we see how traumatic her childhood was. She moved from foster home to foster home. She lived in an orphanage for a time, and she was married off very, very young as a way to almost try to escape being pushed from one home to another. So we have this idea of Marilyn Monroe and who she was, and in the book we really see how she was trying to break free of the role she was stereotyped as. Everyone in the media and movie studios had this idea of what she could be, and she really wanted to rise above that. So this is a tragic story and becomes very moving when you see written as though in her words of what she wished she could do. And I learned facts about Marilyn Monroe I hadn't known before. I didn't know how big of a reader she was, and other things where it just opens your eyes to a person where you think you know them, but really the image that's put out there is nothing like what the reality is. This book is recommended for grades 8 and up. The next book was recently released. It's The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna. This is the first book in an epic fantasy series that is inspired by the culture of West Africa. It also has feminist mythology throughout it. And if you're a fan of Children of Blood and Bone or Black Panther, you would want to check this book out. In Otera, all 16-year-old girls are subjected to the ritual of purity. If they bleed red, that means they're fit for marriage and motherhood. If they bleed gold, that means they're impure and they're banished from the village. So 16-year-old Decca goes through the ritual and is found to have gold blood. And at the same time, when they're attacked by these demons, she's able to fight them off. And so she's also found to be almost immortal by fighting off the demons. So instead of staying in the village, she leaves to join the Emperor's army of other near immortal warrior women. And this book is full of action and is a good fantasy read that, like I said, is brand new, just came out, and is recommended for grades 7 and up. The last book is The Poetry of Secrets by Cambria Gordon. This book was recently released. It's a historical fiction that deals with identity, religious intolerance, and female empowerment. If you enjoy historical fiction and have read books by Elizabeth Wayne or Ruta Sepetys, this would be a read for you to check out. It's set in Trujillo, Spain in 1481 at the time of the Spanish Inquisition. It follows 16-year-old Isabel Prez. She and her family are conversos. They are Jews forced to convert to Catholicism to avoid persecution. So in public, they follow the Catholic rituals, while in private, they still hold on to their Jewish faith. So Isabel's parents arrange for her to marry an older man, the town warden, Don Sancho, to hopefully divert attention from their religion and any suspicion around them. But Isabella is in love with a younger man, a nobleman, Diego. And the book follows the consequences of their romance. And in the book, you see Isabel's strength in how she deals with various horrific events as a result of their romance, and you see her love for her family and her faith. Isabel is a strong character, and it's interesting to see these historical events and what it was like to be a female at that time, dealing with religious persecution and intolerance, and being in love and wanting to be a poet. This book is recommended for grades 7 and up.